Hey friends, today's video is on a movie. I know some of you really do like doing the movies, and I'm overdue, so I figured today would be a good day for a movie. Now, admittedly, the movie I've chosen for today, Sunday in New York, is not a favorite movie of mine. It's not of the caliber of a Casablanca or Maltese Falcon or The Big Sleep or any of those that I might cite as a favorite film. But it is a fun film. It's a lot of fun. And it's an interesting glimpse into sexual mores of the early 1960s. Now, TCM says this movie came out in 64, but it was really released in November of 63. So it's the end of 63, the beginning of 64. It was directed by Peter Tewksbury. It stars Rod Taylor, Cliff Robertson, Jane Fonda, Robert Culp, Jo Marrow, and Jim Backus. Now, I would maybe have lost some of you just by mentioning Jane Fonda. And for those of you who will bail out because you don't like Jane Fonda, oh well, I'm sorry. This was before all of that happened with the Vietnam vets. And it's deeply regrettable that she did what she did. I'm not making excuses for her. She herself has apologized. I'm married to a Vietnam vet who served in Vietnam, and he has no problem with her. He has no problem whatsoever. And so I often will allow myself to be influenced by what my Vietnam vet says when it comes to things like that, because he served the country, our country, for over 30 years. And if he has a handle on it, who am I to argue? At any rate, it's a situational romantic comedy. And in those days, they called them mid-century style. They had a name for it. What were they called? Cute. Hold on. A meet cute. That's what they were called. Nowadays we call them rom-coms. In those days they were called meet cute. And this kind of format has become a staple of modern day rom-com. So it's interesting to see an early rom-com. There were earlier ones than this. I mean, certainly they were making them in the 30s and 40s. And I guess they've always been making situational romantic comedies, but I just thought I'd mention the term, which was a meet cute. Now, the opening scene, we have three individuals arriving to a scene. We have Rod Taylor on a train. His character's name is Mike. He's on a train. He's arriving to New York City on a train from Philadelphia. Jane Fonda's character, Eileen, is also on a train. However, she's arriving, I think, from Boston, or somewhere up in the New England states. She's arriving by train from New England to New York City. And then there's a third character, Cliff Robertson, who is an airline pilot. I think his name is Adam, and he is Eileen's brother. And he's arriving to New York via plane from whatever destination he had just flown. He's an airline pilot. When he lands and he's at the airport, he makes a call to his hookup girlfriend. And he says, baby, I got a few hours. Do you want to hook up and come to my place for breakfast? So she's agreeable. I think she's crazy about the guy. So she gets up and she proceeds to get ready to go to his house. Now, in the meanwhile, he goes home. The pilot goes to his apartment in a posh section of New York. And Eileen, his sister, who was on the train, takes a cab and arrives at his apartment just right before this hookup with a girlfriend is supposed to occur. So she arrives at her brother's apartment, and he's happy to see her. He's not like, oh, you came at a terrible time, I have other plans. He was like, oh, I'm so happy to see you. But she does arrive unannounced. And he asks about her romance because apparently she's been, dating this extremely wealthy person who is very handsome and has all the right boxes checked. And he asks, how's that going? And she tells him, well, it's not going. And he assumes she broke up with him, when in reality, the guy broke up with her. And the brother's like, wow, why did he break up with you? You're perfect together. And she explains that her boyfriend broke up with her because she wouldn't put out, that she wouldn't go to bed with him. Now, remember, this is 63. And if it's in the movies, it means it's already been happening for a while. So it's probably already been the norm since the 50s that couples would do the boom boom before marriage, And it's probably always been since time immemorial. But by the time Hollywood makes a statement about something, it's been happening in real life for a long time. So in 63, it's interesting, which is a reason why I picked this movie to help illustrate. In 63, it already was a corny topic because already this was happening with couples. But at any rate, she explains that he threw her under because she wasn't putting out for him. And so she needed some time to get away because she was devastated and she really loved the guy, and she was really hurt by him breaking up with her. So they get into a conversation and she asks him, do you sleep with women? And he swears on their sacred baby childhood, oath that he does not sleep with women. There's a loophole. Anyway, he swears that he does not sleep with women. So she believes that they're like the last two virgins in the United States. And in the meanwhile, his girlfriend, and she talks to him about how other fellas, he's not the only fella that, everybody she dates really has the expectation of sex. And she's just thinking like she has these old-fashioned mores because, this is the expectation all men have. And she's kind of surprised that he doesn't have that expectation. So she's a little bit, I guess, validated by him saying to her, men marry decent women. And he assures her that men marry decent girls. In the meanwhile, his girlfriend Mona arrives for their tryst. He introduces his sister, and I guess she kind of figures out what's going on. So he and Mona leave, and they try to find a place to hook up, try to find somebody who's not using their apartment for the day, or they're just trying to find now why he doesn't just get a hotel room. He's a pilot. He makes a couple dollars. Getting a hotel room would have been a logical and decent thing to do, but instead he's acting like he's a teenager, and he's trying to, flop it at a friend's house, while the friend is out or whatever. But at any rate, to keep it PG, they tell Eileen that they're going ice skating at Rockefeller Center. So she naively believes that Mona and he are going to Rockefeller Center. After they leave the apartment, a phone call comes in for the brother, and it's from the airline boss saying that he's needed to pilot a plane because apparently he's on the flight schedule. So off Eileen goes naively to Rockefeller Center to find her brother and relay the message that he's needed because he's on flight call. She hops a bus, and she's wearing a corsage that's on her dress or on her jacket, her bolero jacket. And while she's on the bus passing a gentleman, Rod Taylor, whose name is Mike, who was my first Hollywood crush when I was a little girl, which is probably why I like this movie. Her corsage snags on his suit jacket, on his pocket. Now, this is another interesting point, is that people are on a public bus and they're dressed in suits and dresses. This is a period of time when gentlemen and women, or ladies, wouldn't be on public buses in sweatpants, or it would be unthinkable. So it's interesting to see the standard of how people dressed in those days. At any rate, so her corsage snaps on, somehow attaches to his jacket, And they're not getting anywhere, and her bus comes, so he has to pick her up and take her off the bus, and the two of them are standing on a New York City corner stuck together, and people are looking at them like, what's going on here? He finally gets them disentangled. He cuts away the pocket or something like that, and he suggests that they sit down to a cup of coffee at a restaurant or something like that. Now, what we find out is that Mike was coming to New York from Philadelphia for a hookup. He had an occasional girlfriend that he hooked up with. So that's why he was taking the bus, because he was going to this girl's apartment. But he kind of like changes his plans because he sees the potential in this situation, because Eileen is really cute. She's a very young Jane Fonda. I guess she was about 23 years old, so she's kind of adorable. And he decides he's going to take advantage of this situation. So they go to Rockefeller Center, and he begins with his warming up of like dirty jokes, which in a previous scene with her brother, she says, when guys when they work up to sex, they always have a couple dirty jokes lined up. And so I can always tell that that's where the conversation's going to go. So she figures out that he's just looking for sex. So she decides to ditch him. So she goes into the bathroom, writes a note, asks the attendant to give the gentleman the note, or to put the note on the table so he's aware that she's ditched him. But in the meanwhile, he kind of reads the writing on the wall, and he kind of says, well, she's not the kind of girl who does this. I can tell by her responses. So he asks the waiter to give Eileen the note when she comes back from the woman's room. So they both ditch each other, unbeknownst to the other. And neither one of them ever received the note, so neither of them ever realized that the other one ditched them. So again, they both get on a bus to continue their path, because they were on the same bus before. So they get back on another bus going the same place. And sure enough, they're both on the bus again. And this time, her corsage entangles with another gentleman, but this time the gentleman's like an older guy, like in his 60s or 70s. And so Mike really sees the humor in that. So he shows up to disengage the gentleman from the corsage, and they resume their conversation, and he apologizes for having ditched her, and she says, what do you mean you ditched me? I ditched you. So they have a good laugh when they each realize that they ditched each other. Now, I forgot to mention that where they had their coffee was in Rockefeller Center, because they were having their coffee presumably to look at the skating rink to see if they could find Eileen's brother, which of course he's not there, because that's not what they were doing. So I'm getting this out of order a little bit, but before she sees or encounters Mike again on that bus for the second time, I think she does see her brother and Mona, and she very innocently, says, why aren't you at Rockefeller Center? But they were at a phone booth making phone calls, still trying to hook up at somebody's apartment. And she says, well, you're needed to do a flight. So there's a subplot with Mona and her brother Adam, who all throughout the movie, which I'm not going to go back and forth to all the time, but suffice it to say that throughout the movie, there are little subplot scenes where Adam and Mona are trying to find a way to be together. But it's thwarted. Either he has to take a flight, and then she tries to get on the flight with him, but then at the last second he's called off the flight, and then she's going on a plane to Pittsburgh or Colorado without him. So they have a lot of mishaps trying to hook up. So that's a little on the comical side, but I probably won't get into it anymore. And so after Eileen and Mike hook up the second time on the bus, and they have their good laugh about how each of them ditched each other, they decided to just start over again and just have a nice, friendly date. And so they have this beautiful, storybook kind of date in Central Park, rowing boats. And for those of you who are familiar with old-time movies from not old-time, but movies from maybe the 50s and 60s, you'll catch a glimpse of, what's his name? The tall fella who always appeared in films with Prentice. He was in Where the Boys Are. I can't think of his name. His name escapes me. But he's in that scene very briefly, rowing a boat with a girl. Anyway, that's just a little bit of trivia. So they're having an idyllic, date in Central Park, and they really enjoy one another. And then a downpour happens, and they're soaking wet. So she, rather innocently, says, my brother lives, his apartment is right around the corner. Why don't we just go to his apartment, get out of the rain, warm up, and, just have it just makes sense to do that, because she didn't want to end the date because they were having a good time. So once they're in her apartment, I forget what the catalyst was, but something, he was just being a gentleman because he understood now where she stood on the premarital sex stuff. But all of a sudden, something triggers in her head, and she decides, I'm going to try to seduce this guy because I want to lose my virginity. Because if I lose my virginity, then maybe when my boyfriend comes back to me, I'll have that under my belt and I won't be inexperienced or something like that. So she begins this campaign in the apartment of trying to seduce Mike. And he's taken aback by it because he's like, whoa, who is this girl? She's not the same girl I was just meeting before. So in the process of wooing and getting on with it, she must have told him, we don't see this part, but she must have told him that she was a virgin. And so he says, hold, cease and desist. Ain't no way I'm doing this. I never de-virgin a girl. I take girls as they come to me, and if they've done it before, we're good. But I never deflower a girl. It's just my code, right? So she's really frustrated. And of course, they're in stages of disarray. They're wearing, I guess, bathrobes, or she's wearing a lingerie. I forget what they're wearing. But they're clearly not dressed, okay? And in the process of them fighting and arguing, who shows up at the door but her long-term boyfriend, who just shows up unannounced and says, I love you. I shouldn't have let you go, or whatever he says, and please marry me. So he proposes. So she's standing there with who the fiance or the boyfriend assumes is her brother, but it's not her brother. Because the boyfriend never met the brother. So Eileen and Mike, who didn't go through with it, but looked like they did, if it wasn't, if the boyfriend knew that this wasn't her brother, he'd have had a different opinion. But he very naively is like, oh, you must be Adam, her brother. It's so nice to meet you. And so Eileen and Mike play along with it and pretend that Mike is Adam, because they don't know what to do. So she's happy that Russ shows up and proposes. Under normal circumstances, she'd have been elated, but she just doesn't know how to handle this, because at some point when they get married and he finds, and Russ finds out about her family dynamic, he's going to know that Mike is not her brother. So Russ is called, it says, look, I'm double parked outside. I got to find a legit parking spot before I'm towed. So he runs out. And so in the 2 or 3 minutes that he's out parking the car, Mike and Eileen are frantically, comically, cornily, very corny, having a discussion about what are they going to do? How are they going to solve this situation? And they're trying to get dressed, and they're trying to, make right what it looks like, And then, of course, who else shows up on the scene but her brother, Adam? So Adam pops in, and Adam is like, Adam figures out what's going on. So Adam's like, who are you? But he doesn't betray Eileen. He lets them pull off the charade, because it's not his place to betray his sister. But, he's like the thorn in the side of Mike and Eileen, because they both know that he's in on it, because they both know that the brother is aware of what they're doing. And there's a couple of seconds where, a couple of awkward seconds where the four of them are in the apartment together, and it's kind of comical. It's just kind of corny, the kind of stuff they're saying. We have to realize that the code was still in place, but we can see that the code deteriorated. You know, they were doing things in this movie that probably they only would have done pre-code, you know, prior to 1934 in the earlier movies. But, you know, the code had been whittled down so much that even this, which was supposed to have been a clean take on the subject matter, was, it just showed how much the code had deteriorated, because they were pretty much, even though it was presented in a very corny, unrealistic way, they were still touching on serious topics. And, but, you know, there was a whole lot of double entendre too, you know, that pulled off the scene to let you know exactly what was going on without showing what they did or didn't do or how close they came. Let's see. So, I'm sorry about this. I do want to point out that in the split second before the boyfriend shows up, you can tell that there's a spark of interest between Eileen and Mike. So when they decide, you know, that they're not going to go through with the tryst, and they voice their opinions about, she explains to him that she wanted to be deflowered because she's always rejected by men because she won't put out. And once he understands what she's about, he softens to her, and, you know, he kind of like appreciates that she's a nice girl. So they have a moment, a glimpse with each other where you could tell there's a spark, that they do like each other. But at that exact moment where there's a spark, that's when the boyfriend pops up. So that moment of like recognizing that there's potential for them, that's when the boyfriend pops up. So I apologize, I forgot to mention that. So at any rate, with the four of them in the apartment, the brother, the new fiance, Mike and Eileen, they all decide, let's go to dinner. So they decide to go to dinner. There's a few moments where Eileen has private time with her brother or something like that. And the brother's like, well, you got to tell him the truth. I mean, what are you going to do? And she's like, I'll tell him later. Maybe we'll tell him over dinner. And there's a certain amount of ridiculous conversation about that topic. So they go to dinner, and after an uncomfortable evening with the four of them at dinner, the real brother takes off. The fake brother, Mike, says his goodbyes and says, I'm going back. He pretends he's an airline pilot with the brother, so he had to lie to pretend who he was. So he pretended he was a friend of the brothers and that he was an airline pilot. So the pilot and Mike both both leave the diner or the restaurant at the same time to make it look like they were partners working together. So they take off. And you can tell that the goodbye between Mike and Eileen is a tender moment, you know, because they really had feelings for each other. But so now finally Eileen and her new fiance are alone at the restaurant, and the theme song, Sunday in New York, is being played, sung by who else but Peter Nero. So you see a really young Peter Nero in this film, and he's the lounge lizard. He's singing Sunday in New York. So at any rate, she tells Russ the truth, and she says, you know, I wanted to be deflowered. She doesn't like try to pretend it was an innocent, well, I said, let's go in from the rain, which it was initially innocent. But she says, and then after that happened, it occurred to me that I wanted to be deflowered because it seems to me that men reject me all the time because I'm a virgin. And so I wanted to lose that status. You dumped me. What the hell do you care? You know, that kind of thing. And he was, of course, being judgmental of that. And she gave him a line that so many men give women. She said, but I did it for you. But that falls like he doesn't like that very much. So you could tell that once he knows the truth, he's not too happy. And he's very polite. He's a gentleman. He takes her home. And you could tell by his demeanor that he's very disappointed and very unhappy with what the truth of the matter is. So he tells her, I'll call you tomorrow, you know. So she says goodnight to him. And I don't know if this will be one of the questions. I don't know if she believes that he's going to call, or if she believes that there's still a chance that there's going to be a relationship for them. I don't know what she thinks, because she seems to accept that he's going to call her tomorrow, and she says, okay, you know, but you could tell, it seems like he's probably not going to call her tomorrow. And if he calls her tomorrow, it'll be to say, see you later, I'm out of here. So it's unclear what she's thinking. But at any rate, he says his goodnights. She's in the apartment all by herself. And when the boyfriend, the fiance, leaves and he's in his sports car and he's driving off, he sees Mike, who is returning to, sorry, he sees Mike on the street, who's returning to Eileen's apartment to see how it all worked out for her. He wants to know how things worked out. But he doesn't know that the boyfriend sees him. So the boyfriend takes the opportunity to go through a puddle, splash him with water, and when he's stunned and he doesn't know what's going on, the fiance gets out of the car and just punches Mike in the eye. So Mike lands on the ground. So Mike is getting punched by everybody. He got punched by the brother for trying to seduce his sister at one scene that I failed to mention, but Eileen makes it clear to the brother that this guy's a gentleman. He refused to proceed, so you shouldn't have punched him in the eye. But the boyfriend punches him in the eye. So he goes up to Eileen's apartment and he says, I just wanted to make sure everything was okay. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. But now that I know you're all right, I'll go back to Philadelphia. And she says, it's too late to go back to Philadelphia. You shouldn't go back to Philadelphia. I can attest that you're a gentleman. I know you won't try anything funny. You spend the night on the sofa. I'll spend the night upstairs. And in the morning, you can just take off. Russ is going to call me in the morning, but he won't call probably until at least 8 o'clock. So until 8 o'clock, you're free to stay here, and he'll never know the difference. So, you know, Mike is like, yeah, I'll leave by 5 in the morning. You know, I'm going to be... I really don't want to make this situation any worse than I already have. So they have a few words and he kisses her goodnight. And boy, what a kiss. It's a real nice kiss. It's not a kiss for friends, you know. It's like a kiss for somebody who's like trying his last chance to get in with this girl. So they kiss. She's upstairs. He's downstairs. She had made him a hot drink where she had to turn in an electric kettle. And she forgot to unplug it. And earlier in the movie, she mentions that at one time she forgot to unplug the kettle and it started a fire on the bar, you know. So she's upstairs, he's downstairs. They're both sleeping uncomfortably. You can tell they're thinking about each other. And she remembers that the kettle's still plugged in. So not to wake him up and not to be, you know, disturb him if he's asleep, she quietly comes down the steps. She goes into the kitchen, she unplugs the kettle. He doesn't know she's there. And that's when he pops up out of bed, runs up the stairs, gets the key out of the door, runs down the steps, throws the key out the window because he doesn't want to be tempted, because he really likes this girl and he's decided, I really like this girl, but I don't want to be inappropriate. So he throws the key out. He doesn't even want to be tempted. So he throws the key out the window. And then he starts his speech. He goes back up to the door and he says, listen, I'm in love with you. I just realized I'm in love with you. I'll be out of your hair. I'm going away, but I just wanted to put my cards on the table. I just wanted you to be aware of the fact that I just love you. So he comes down the steps. Of course, she's in the kitchen. And so as he's talking and he's satisfied that he said his piece, he realizes that she's in the kitchen. And so he's like, whoa, what? You know, so now the two of them are in the same space, and the key, they'll never find the key. The key is on his New York City street. It's many floors below. So they're, you know, well, we don't know because they don't show whatever happens, but they hook, you know, so she apparently must feel the same way he feels, because they embrace in a huge intimate kiss that, you know, where they really mean it and they're not strangers just trying to hook up, right? Because one of the things he said in his speech was, I feel about you, I feel I know you, your soul better than some people who've been together for 20 years. I know who you are, and I think you know who I am, and I think we really belong together, but I'm taking off. I'm not going to ruin your life. So then when they have their kiss, you can tell they really mean it. And then, of course, that's just exactly when the brother, the pilot, opens the door to come back home from his whole day. In the meanwhile, the brother, who kept trying to hook up with his girlfriend because they kept having all these mishaps, in order to get her to talk to him because she's so pissed at him at this stage, the airline pilot brother says to her, look, I'll marry you, you know? And so that made everything okay. And so she agrees to talk to him again because he gave her the promise of marriage. So now the airline pilot brother is getting married because that was the only way he could get his girlfriend to talk to him again. And so it's kind of cute because the two couples make a decision that they belong together. And at the end, when the brother walks in and sees Eileen and Mike kissing in their intimate embrace, he closes the door. They don't know that he's there. He goes wherever he goes, get a hotel room or whatever. And then there's a narration by the brother at the very end saying what happened, that Mike and Eileen get married. They moved to Japan, which is where Mike was going for business. So he was going to get out of her hair forever if she didn't want to be with him. And they moved to Japan and have 3 children, and they live happily ever after. And that he and Mona did indeed get married. And, you know, he became a decent person himself by marrying Mona and making an honest woman of Mona, you know, that kind of thing. But Mona was a good girl. She just was letting him get away with whatever because that was how some people were in those days, you know. But at any rate, it's a cute movie. It's a cute movie, and it's a fun movie to watch if, you know, you're in the mood for a silly, cute movie, and if you really want to see a movie about like sexual mores of the early 60s. It wasn't, you know, there was already like love beads and hippie stuff going on at that point. So you can see in the context of this film that this approach was very naive because, as I mentioned, if it was happening in Hollywood, it was already happening in real life by a dozen years, you know, or a half a dozen years, you know. But it was a really sanitized version of sexual mores of the 60s. So it's kind of fun sometimes. And of course, it's nice to see some of the styles and the way and the way Rockefeller looked in 63 and the fashion that Jane Fonda was wearing. Very nice clothes. And so it's fun for that way. So here are some of my juvenile questions. Are we to believe that Mike and Eileen get intimate at the last scene? Like, do they really go that extra mile finally? I think it's obvious, but we'll ask that question. Another question I want to do is, does Eileen really believe that Russ is going to call her? And does she really believe that things are going to get patched up? Because until Mike shows up to see how she is in the last scenes, she sort of seems pretty naive in believing that she'll be able to patch things up with Russ. So I'm not quite sure about that. Then obviously, if she ended up marrying Mike and they went off to Japan, she had to tell Russ something. So what did she end up telling Russ? And then here's the most critical thinking question, because all these other ones are kind of like yes, no, or superficial questions. But did Russ ever self-reflect that his actions of bullying Eileen into sexual relations that she wasn't comfortable with, does he ever self-reflect enough to realize that it was his bullying, that her response to his bullying is kind of what got them in that situation? Anyway, those are my questions. So and to do this reading, I've decided to use the Angel Tarot. It was a tarot deck that one of my online friends, Claire, turned me on to a couple of years ago. And I was able to get a vintage copy of it. I think it was printed in 1980. I'd like to know the provenance of this particular deck, as a matter of fact. The box says it was made in Japan expressly for U.S. Game Systems, Inc. However, it wasn't the box that was made in Japan, because on the same box it says box made in USA. So the suggestion is that the deck itself was made in Japan expressly for U.S. Game Systems, and it was a sealed deck. I didn't get a used deck. I got a deck that had the seal on it and everything, with a tag that you tear and all that. The book says that the book was printed in the U.S. in 1980. So the implication then is that the deck itself was printed in Japan. Now, I have a plaid back, and I know that this deck comes with another back. So I don't know what I have here, and if anyone knows the provenance of this deck, I'd really appreciate it if you could tell me what the provenance is. Now, why did I choose this deck for this? Well, I haven't used this deck online for a while, a couple years, and it's a light, fun take, modern take on the Marseille deck. And since this is a romantic sitcom, modern story that kind of emulates earlier situational romantic trysts of earlier days, I just thought it would be a fun deck to use. So let me go into my meditative place, and I'll be right back. Alrighty, so while I was mixing and handling the cards, I decided to, make sure I have them up right, I decided to reword some of the questions so that they're not yes-no answers. I'd rather have some critical thinking questions. So instead of asking yes, no, do Mike and Eileen consummate their relationship, at the end, I'm going to just ask, what did Mike and Eileen do? And we'll see what the cards have to say, but what did they do in that last scene when we sort of believe that they consummate the relationship, but the film kind of leaves us hanging. We don't really know what they did. We don't know. Because at one point in the film, Mike says, well, you should do it when you really fall in love with somebody. If you fall in love with somebody, it's okay to do it. But if you're just, hooking up with a stranger and they've never done it before, that's a no-no, because a girl's first time should be with somebody she's in love with. So that is a point that Mike did make earlier in the film. The guy, I don't want to deflower a girl just for a casual thing. It's got to have meaning, So I forgot to mention that. Alrighty, here we go. Okay. So, Two of Swords in the context of the question could mean they penetrate the two of them. Ooh, they break down the doors or whatever. Yep. Oh, yeah, they succumbed. They totally succumbed to their vices. They totally did. And for fun, let's just do the quint cards. So we have a 2 and a 16 is 18. 18 and 15 is, I think, 23. No, 33. 18, 15. I got to do it because I'm not the world's best. 33 minus 22 would be 11, which would be fortitude. Let me pull that card. In a way, this kind of reminds me of the walls of Jericho falling down in the film. What was it called? Remember, something about the night with Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert. Oh, gosh. I know some of you old movie fans know that name of that movie. It was something about the night. It happened one night. So this kind of is a reference to an earlier film of kind of the same situational comedy romance where they end up being together. So that also reminds me of, this card also takes me to that memory of that film where the same sort of thing happens, where they have, a romance, a couple has a romance under ridiculous circumstances, and then they end up, what the girl is supposed to be, go with someone else, and then they end up together, at any rate. So yeah, there's a penetration, the two of them. There's a falling a falling from grace perhaps, or a letting go of mores. And then we see the devil card as a card of, succumbing to their vices. And the 42 card, I guess in this context, is a little complicated because she kind of let go of that. The 42 card, it being a quint card, kind of suggests that the overall theme of the gist of the reading was having moral strength of character, right? And showing what you're made of. But I think these cards more than sufficiently describe that they successfully whittled away at the fortitude aspect. So that's a cute read. Okay. I'd like to know, instead of having another yes/no question, I'd like to know what Eileen actually thought before Mike came back to the apartment and before they really both admitted to each other that they really did love each other. It seems like Eileen was just willing, if Russ was willing, to just make up and go with Russ. But I really want to know, what did she think? Did she really believe that Russ would be okay with all of this? And did she what did she expect Russ to say in the phone call the next morning? Now, I'm not going to go off camera because this is kind of a lighthearted read, and I'm not going to do all that. All right. Oh, another Two of Batons. Okay, just like the other one was Two of Swords. Now this is Two of Batons. So I think she expected that they would go on. But maybe she knew in her heart to put a fork in it, that it ran its course. What did she think? I guess she thought he was going to be a gentleman, and I think she thought Russ was going to be a gentleman and go through with it. Let's see what the quint card would be. 2 and 10 is 12. So it would be the Hanged Man. And for those of you who are not familiar with this deck, I will show the cards, and hopefully you're okay with seeing the cards. I get the sense, seeing the Hanged Man, that it would always be kind of a blotch where he would always maybe hold it against her. So maybe he'd be a gentleman and he'd, protect her honor, and they'd go on, but the spark between them was really done. The spark between them was finished. And I think she probably realized that this would always be held against her. So I think that's a really good explanation for what she kind of figured was going to be how Russ moved forward in their relationship. Okay, so if we're to believe that Russ would have called her, and maybe that he was willing to try, by then it was too late because Eileen had already made a decision, and she was going with Mike. They hooked up. She was clear by the end of the film who she really wanted to be with. So how does Eileen tell Russ? And he calls, and pretending like he's a gentleman, and I'm just gonna, Russ. I'd sure like to be a fly on the wall when she explained to Russ, I'm going with Mike after all. So let's see. How does Eileen tell Russ? Thanks for being noble, but I made a choice. Okay, transition, moving forward. Intellectually, she grew. Hey, she learned. 3 of Cups. So she learned where her emotions lie. She kind of matured in her emotions. And the star card. Let's see what the quint card would be. 7 and 3 is 10. 10 and 17 is 27. 27 minus 22 is 5. So that would be the Pope card. So let me pull the Pope card. Oh, and isn't that a lovely card? I guess the Moon card is always a lovely card. You'll notice with the Angel Tarot, and the reason in the beginning that I said I was choosing this deck because it's a modern deck, that with references to the older decks. So we have, for example, for the coins, we have the connection to diamonds. With batons, we have a connection to, where is it, the clover or the clubs. What did I say? Oh, 5, the Pope. Hearts with the cups, and swords with the spade. So I'm looking for, I probably passed it because I wasn't paying attention. The Pope. There he is. We could also see this as like a love triangle. We could definitely look at that as a love triangle, but that she made a decision. She had an opportunity for real love, and she took it. And I guess that's what she told him, And I also do think, though, that there was a transition from, she had an intellectual transition to maturity, more emotional maturity. So I think this card could not just represent a triangle of 3 in a relationship, but also growth in the direction of emotional growth. And you see the berries on the tree. So she's blossomed. And I think she told him that. I think she said, look, I've blossomed and I have an opportunity for real love, and I'm taking it. I'm taking it. Because it happened spontaneously, it happened genuinely. And then, of course, this card, which could be could reference a few things. It could be, she might have said, "Hey, I'm getting married. I'm choosing this guy." It could be something like that, because a religious or clerical person in those days would have, aside from a justice of the peace, could have been in a position of marrying them. But I think it might have been that she was breaking free of the standards of the time, and that she released herself from those rigid standards and the standards that he held her to. It was okay for him to have expectations of this, but when she tries to do something I think she called him out on it. That's what I think. I think she explained that she fell in love and that she was released, she was mature, and that she made a choice. But I think these cards suggest that she called him out on his double standard. That's what I think for sure. Wow. Okay. And my last question was, does Russ ever see the light and consider that his pressure and his bullying of Eileen is in large part responsible, or had something to do with the actions she took? One thing, the butterfly effect, right? Whatever we do affects how things proceed. And his behavior toward her, he actually thought when he showed up that, it wasn't too late, that nothing in the meanwhile had happened, or nothing that he said to her, or nothing that he put her through would have affected her. Right? He just made this assumption that he could just show up and have his way. And does he ever self-reflect, especially after what Eileen tells him? Does he ever self-reflect and realize that how he bullied her in large part contributed to the course of action that happened, that made her open to another relationship with someone else? So let's ask in a more critical context. So upon self-reflection, what does Russ come to realize about his behavior? That's a better question. Oh man, okay, Two of Swords. The opening with twos is popular in this collection of readings. Her. Maybe he feels he lost the love of his life. I don't know. Oh, wow. He holds her in high regard. Oh, wow, that seems unlikely, huh? Because it seemed like he was kind of a male chauvinist pig, to be honest. Okay, so we have 2 and 2 is 4. And that would be the, oh, wow, look at that. The Emperor was the first card. Isn't that not, that hardly ever happens. Usually I have to go through the whole deck. Okay, so he sees himself as someone in charge, looking back. Maybe I guess maybe he sees that she's the one that got away. Maybe he does come to understand these things. Interesting how they're all looking this way. None of the women are looking at him. He's reflecting back. And she is looking toward the 2 swords. So yeah, I think Russ has a moment of clarity where he sees that his behavior had consequences and he lost the love of his life. I think so. I think he does have a moment of clarity. Might not have lasted for long, but I think he had it. Anyway, he remains a great catch. He was the wealthiest guy in Boston or whatever, so he wouldn't be alone for long. And that moment of feeling bad about losing Eileen, I don't think would last too much. I think he probably could justify it because I'm sure he could publicly say things about it. I don't think he would, though. I think he probably held her in regard, and I don't know. I hope. I'm not sure that he had personal growth because here is just like a conflict. But I think in his own heart he knew that she got away. So I think he did. So I hope that you thought this was a fun application of the cards. And as I mentioned, this is not my favorite movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a fun movie. And if it's a rainy Sunday and you're just flipping through the channels and you find this movie, give it a shot, because it's fun. It's mindless, it doesn't require a whole lot of thought, but it's an interesting foray into these, the sexual norms. And as I mentioned, it was a very innocent take on the sexual norms of that period of time, because as I mentioned, in Hollywood, by the time they put something on screen, it's already been happening for a dozen years. You know what I'm saying? Especially Hollywood of those days. But it represents the ideal standard that was still being pretended, at least, So it's a fun film. Until next time, friends, peace, stay well, do no harm, be whatever, kind, and all that stuff.